All right. So, like Jared said, I'm the project coordinator for the Integrated Deer Management Project. And so I'm going to run through a pretty brief high-level introduction to the project, touch on really the basics of what we're doing, where, when, why, and a little bit of the how, but a lot of that is going to be covered by the following webinars in the next 3 weeks. So I'm not going to go too deep, I'm not going to be sharing real results, but again, giving everybody a nice introduction to the project. So what exactly is the Integrated Deer Management Project? It's a multi-year research project, began in July of 2018. It's led by the Purdue Department of Forestry and Natural Resources in partnership with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. And its overarching goal really is to improve the understanding and management of deer in the state of Indiana. As far as who's involved in more detail, at Purdue University, we have 8 faculty across the F&R department and then 1 in aviation as well. We have 2 staff, 2 postdocs, 3 PhD candidates, and 2 master's students. And that's not even including the many seasonal technicians that we hire for fieldwork each year, up to 10 individuals. We have students helping out on the project as well. And then we have the Indiana DNR, Division of Fish and Wildlife. They're the funding agency. They're also the state agency that manages deer. So they're the partnership in this study. We also have some partnerships with state and federal agencies or NGOs, primarily for property access when we're working on state forests or national forests and land trusts. As far as the Purdue folks, again, those 3 PhD candidates, they're really the ones who are driving a lot of the research on this project. They'll be presenting on their work and their results in those following webinars in the next 3 weeks. And then we have some master's students whose work intersect with the rest of the deer project as well. So the objectives for the Integrated Deer Management Project, we have three objectives really that all are driven primarily by each of those PhD students, and then a 4th kind of overarching objective to bring it all together at the end. So our first one is to estimate deer population density. In order to manage deer, you need to understand how many there are. That's kind of the bedrock for all decision making. So our population graduate student, Zach, is investigating that. We also want to assess deer impacts on habitat, understanding what deer are eating, what sort of impact that's having on the habitat and vegetation communities. Again, important for understanding and keeping the ecosystem healthy. And our third primary goal is to evaluate public perception and expectations of deer management. And so while we're looking at managing deer, deer are a public resource. They're managed for the public. So it's very important to understand public perception and what Hoosiers want from deer management and what informs their expectations, personal experience, where they live, what their hobbies or livelihoods are. And then our 4th goal really is bringing those 3 things together, combining them into an integrated model of management. And so the real overarching hope here is to create a decision-making structure that will allow us to basically take data from those 3 earlier objectives, how many deer there are, what kind of habitat, what kind of impact they're having on habitat, and how people feel about those things to inform decision making to get the best result for everyone where possible. This is a statewide study, but we work in 3 regions of the state. One of the first things that this project did was to create what we call regional management units, or RMUs. So traditionally, deer management in Indiana has been conducted on the county level, but we wanted to group things into some more easily managed areas, things that are grouped by similarity. So in the summer of 2018, we created these regional management units. We did that by clustering counties based on their proximity to each other and their similarity in things that are related to deer and deer management. So looking at sources of deer mortality, which include antlered and antlerless harvest, deer vehicle collision, and crop depredation permits, and looking at how those numbers were impacted by deer habitat, percentage of cropland in CRP, percentage of developed land, road density, human population density, and hunter density. And so that model and analysis resulted in 9 regional management units, and we've added a 10th one based on the deer reduction zones that the DNR has. And of those 10, we selected 3 RMUs to do our field work on. And so you can see them here on the map. We have one more or less based around Purdue in west central Indiana. We have one in southern Indiana, and then we've got this one up in northeastern Indiana. And as you can see, there's a gap. We leave out Elkhart County there between St. Joe County and the 4 eastern ones. And that's because these RMUs didn't have to be strictly contiguous. St. Joe just had more similarity to those other 4 counties, or rather Elkhart was less similar to them. And that's why it's got dropped out of that RMU. Again, these are multi-county regions, so we don't do field work across the entirety of the region. We can't sample every single piece of land, but we do work on what we call test landscapes, and these are 4 square mile areas. They're chosen randomly within each RMU based on the DNR's deer reporting grid that allows us to have a common frame of reference for our data and the DNR's data. We surveyed 20 of them each year. There's 6 or 7 in each RMU. And so over the course of the study, we've surveyed 48 because we kept 6 continuous each year to allow us to evaluate the same properties year to year and see if there's any changes or trends in deer or habitat there. And across those 48 test landscapes, we've had 580 landowner participants who've graciously allowed us to conduct work on their property and evaluate deer and habitat. As far as the timeline goes, like I said, our study began in July of 2018. We spent that summer and fall creating the RMUs, collecting all of our materials, finalizing sampling protocols, picking those study sites, and then contacting all of those landowners to get property permission. We started fieldwork itself in January 2019, right after the new year. And fieldwork occurred January through September of each year from 2019 through 2021. And so what that means is we've just finished our field season for this year, and really the fieldwork for this stage of the project. And now what we're focused on is analysis. So all those graduate students who've spent the last 3 years collecting data from all over the state on deer numbers, deer habitat, and human dimensions, they're now focused on generating results from that data, putting together some models and integrating all of their results into that model of deer management. That's our final goal. So I'm going to go briefly into more detail about those 3 goals and how we're collecting data to evaluate deer population, deer habitat, and public perception. Like I said, I'm going to give a pretty brief overview here of methods and just some simple numbers of what we've done. I'm not going to be sharing any results. Our PhD students are going to be giving more in-depth presentations on these on their topics in later webinars, so I'm not going to steal their thunder. So our first objective was estimating deer population. We want to understand, or how do we determine how many deer there are? There are a lot of different ways to evaluate or to estimate population densities. Our goal beyond just estimating deer densities was to evaluate some of these common methods and get a sense of what's the most cost-effective method to recommend going forward for continual monitoring, either by the DNR or anyone else. And so the 3 methods that we focus on here are the use of trail cameras, pellet counts, and aerial surveys. For trail cameras, we set over 300 cameras each year for a total of 1,103 cameras. They get set in early January and picked up in March or April, and they're active throughout that entire span, taking images anytime something triggers the motion sensor on those cameras. And so what that means is we got over 3.2 million photos in the last 3 years. And these cameras capture all kinds of wildlife, so not just deer, but we also get fox, coyote as well. We spent a lot of time going through these photos and identifying species that are present. It represents a pretty great set of data for all kinds of research questions, but of course we're focused on the deer. And so the images of deer that we've captured are going to be used by Zach to estimate deer densities. Second method we use for estimating deer density is pellet counts. And this basically involves walking a line and counting the groups of deer pellets that you find. Again, like images of deer, pellet groups can be used as an indicator of deer presence. You can get an estimate of density through that. So we do about 250, we do more than 250 surveys each year, done in March or April. So after the snow melt, but before green up, so the pellets aren't covered by anything. And we split those between forested areas and ag fields, you know, the kind of places where you expect deer to spend most of their time. And over the last 3 years, Zach and his teams have counted over 4,000 pellet groups. Our third method for estimating deer population is the use of aerial surveys. So under these, similar to the camera trapping or trail camera surveys, we are taking images of deer. In this instance, we're using an airplane with a paired infrared and color camera platform. And so we fly surveys over our test landscapes. The advantage these aerial surveys have over the camera trapping surveys is we can cover the entire area in a short amount of time, and we know that deer showing up in one survey route aren't going to show up on the next in comparison to the camera traps, which are out there for weeks, and deer can move around quite a bit. This paired camera platform allows us to detect animals more easily through the infrared imagery, which you can see on the left here, and then allows us to use the color camera on the right to verify that the infrared images that we see are actually deer and not livestock or other wild animals. And so you can see here, we've got those infrared images for detections there. And if you look, they correspond to deer on the right. And overall with these aerial surveys, we've surveyed about 2,500 miles of Indiana for deer. Moving on to our second objective, habitat condition. We want to understand what impacts are deer having on the habitat. So the three goals or three kind of sub-objectives here are to measure browse intensity. So how much impact are deer having on plants by eating them. Survey vegetation communities for general composition and health, and then also create and measure stump sprouts. And as far as measuring browse intensity goes, similar to the population density objective, we're evaluating a handful of different methods for efficiency, cost effectiveness, and ease of use. So when we're measuring browse intensity, the first method we use is this Twig Age Method. It's a winter sampling technique that's relatively simple, allows us to go out and survey ash maple and sassafras saplings during the winter period. So after leaf off, before green up. These are species that are pretty easy to identify out in the woods. And we basically go out and count branches that have been eaten and age twigs based on how long it's been since they've last eaten. And that gives you an indication of browse intensity. We also have an oak Sentinel method, which allows a little more control over the impacts that deer are having. So what that involves is planting oak seedlings and controlling whether deer can access them or not. So the first thing we do is we construct exclosures, which you can see in this image here. Basically, it's some mesh fencing and PVC pipes to hold it up. It's sufficient to keep deer out of an area. We plant oak seedlings in that exclosure and then in the surrounding woodlots. So we've got protected seedlings and unprotected seedlings. Then we measure the differences in growth and survival between those two. So we know that oak seedlings that are protected from deer get to a certain height or certain survival rate, whereas the ones that are not protected may have a different one, gives us a sense of what impact deer are having, in particular on oak growth and regeneration. And then we also look at indicator species. So this is a list of species that are, when present, indicate that the habitat is in relatively good condition or there's not significant negative effects of deer browse. And so in particular, what we look at is sweet Sicily, Jack in the Pulpit, and white baneberry. And over the course of the last 3 years, RD, the PhD student on the habitat condition, him and his technicians have surveyed 173 woodlots. They've done over 22 miles of twig age sampling, built 140 exclosures across the state, and planted over 5,000 oak seedlings. So they've put in quite a bit of time and effort looking at these 3 methods of browse intensity. As far as vegetation community goes, RD and his crew are taking some pretty common metrics of vegetation community. So looking at the occurrence of various species, and we're looking at both woody and herbaceous species, their size, percent cover, and presence or absence of browse. And that's broken down by species and age class, looking at understory, midstory, and above. And from that, RD is able to construct a browse preference ranking for our various study sites. So we can say, in a certain part of the state, deer prefer to eat one species, they're avoiding others, and that sort of information, which may change from region to region based on what's available, can help us understand, where deer are having a greater impact, and if managers want to promote deer habitat or lessen deer browsing impacts, you've got some options there. So he puts together a pretty good preference ranking. And the final objective under this habitat condition is stump sprouts. So this is similar to our oak Sentinel method a little bit. What we do is we create stumps to measure the resprouting success and browsing preference, as opposed to the oak Sentinel, which is only looking at oak. Under these stump sprouts, we created them under a greater breadth of species: hackberry, maple, ash, oak, and then sassafras. But similarly, we have some stumps that are caged and protected from deer. We've got some that are exposed to deer. And again, evaluating this method for how well it indicates the level of deer browse and browse intensity and what kind of impacts that has on the habitat. Our final objective and focus on the study is the human dimensions side of things. So this is the work that Taylor does. So we want to know, what do people think about and what do they want from deer management? Again, deer is a public resource. Indiana DNR is a public agency. We want to understand, what do the public want? So the first question is, how do Hoosiers perceive deer populations across the state? This is the sort of thing that's going to vary based on where people live. Deer populations aren't the same everywhere. People's exposure to deer isn't the same everywhere. You have urban residents who may not interact with deer as much, rural residents, farmers, hunters who interact with deer more frequently, commuters, all sorts of different use types that are going to have different perceptions of deer. We want to understand, how does emotion and experience shape perceptions of deer? So, someone will see a fawn, that's a very cute, memorable experience, likely to have a positive impact or positive perception of deer, compared to somebody who sees the damage that deer have done to their crops or to their garden, and has a less positive experience. And then we want to understand, how can social and ecological data be integrated? So again, we can collect data on deer and habitat, we can collect data on people. The real important thing is figuring out how those two things relate and how they can inform management going forward. So in order to understand public perceptions of deer management, the first step was to talk to the public. So Taylor went out and conducted a number of interviews with stakeholders. So these are individuals that live within the state, whether they're hunters, farmers, woodland owners, or just urban and suburban residents. She conducted over 59 interviews and a couple of focus groups with 14 participants. And these results, I said I wasn't going to get into results here, but she has presented some of these results already. She's got an update on the findings from these interviews and focus groups that are posted on our website. And so you can go there to see some of these results, or again, you can tune in for her webinar in a few weeks where I'm sure she'll go into more detail. And these interviews and focus groups were used to then inform a wider survey tool, which was a mailing survey. So we can't call or interview everyone in the state or even a significant number of people without taking years. mailing survey allows us to contact a lot more people and get some responses back to really capture the breadth of Hoosiers and their experiences and opinions on deer. And so Taylor and her team sent out 6,000 surveys in June of this year. They were sent to a kind of stratified group. We had customers of DNR, so individuals who have bought hunting and fishing licenses or signed up for classes or were just in the DNR system one way or the other, as well as Hoosiers who were not in the system, so people who were less likely to have hunted or engaged with natural resources. Maybe they're urban residents or just individuals that don't engage with the DNR. And again, stratified throughout the state and by different land cover types, people that lived in cities, people that live in agricultural areas versus woodland, really trying to get the full suite of experiences and opinions. And so far, they've got a 32% response rate, which is fantastic for these kind of mailing surveys. Anything above 20% is pretty good. So this really indicates that people are interested in deer management and they want to share their opinions on it. And so we're really looking forward to the results that are going to come out of that. Like I said, these are all very preliminary. I'm not going into results here. They'll have a lot more to share in the coming weeks. As far as the project goes, there's some next steps that we're looking forward to. Analyzing collected data. Again, we've got 3 years and millions of photos and rows of data and all of the surveys to go through. The graduate students are working hard on that, trying to understand and pull out some results. I want to integrate those results from each objective. So again, going back to our fourth goal, trying to create a model that takes into account deer numbers, deer habitat, and human dimensions for decision-making and management of deer going forward. Our next goal after that is to share the results. So formats like this webinar or updates on our website, really trying to disseminate our findings and everything with the public. So everyone's informed about what we've seen. And then we'll probably pursue new questions. So the study's not over. There's always more to learn and more to know, especially as we analyze things and find trends or relationships that we didn't expect. There's new avenues of research to look at. But that is it for now. If you want more information on the project, we have a couple different avenues. Our website is linked here, and I know Jared's put it in the chat. So that's where we post, or where you'll find more detailed information on the methods of the project, some of the background. We post our updates, links to any papers that have been published, any news articles, interviews or other things. These webinars will be posted on there if you can't make the later ones. We have a Twitter account at Research in Deer, and that usually posts or links to most of the updates on our website, as well as anything else of interest. And then if you have any specific questions, feel free to contact me. My email is right there, or you can use the contact us form on our website. I'm happy to answer any questions about the project or deer management in general. And if I don't know the answer, I will certainly get you in touch with whoever does.
Thanks, Pat. I think right now we just have one question that relates to the camera traps and how accurate they were. So out of those 3 million pictures, how many of them were deer? How many of them were nothing? And what other kinds of animals did you guys see?
Yeah, so of what we found is with over 3 million photos, there's a certain kind of point of diminishing returns where you don't need more than a certain number. So not all 3 million have been tagged and identified. We've got kind of a subset. And I believe it's about 700,000 to 1 million maybe at this point. If Zach's here, you might be able to correct me. But generally, of the ones we've tagged, I believe about half are empty. And of the remaining half, about half to 60% of those are deer. So deer are definitely the most common animal that we see. But we have plenty of turkeys. We get coyotes, bobcat, squirrels, lots of raccoons, possum. We get birds. So all the photos that I've had in this presentation here have been from our camera traps. We also have a gallery section on our website where we post kind of our best of photos. So feel free to take a look at that and see what sort of interesting wildlife we've seen.
Great. Thanks, Pat.